Donald Trump's motion to strike the inflammatory language out of Jack Smith's indictment is denied by Judge Chutkan, and that's not a surprise at all, because she denies most motions that are good brought by Donald Trump. We're going to go through this one. It is quite short, only a few pages, but it's very curious because we're reading this in the context of Judge Chutkan's gag order. She's also said that Donald Trump cannot speak poorly about witnesses or about certain aspects of the case, and issued a very broad order, which is currently on appeal. And so we'll take a look at that. But this is her order saying that the inflammatory language that's in Jack Smith's indictment is going to stay there. In other words, Trump is gagged from talking certain types of language, from being inflammatory, but Jack Smith's inflammation, his inflammatory language, can be riddled all over the indictment. And the inflammatory language is also being used by people like Rachel Maddow. People like Clavicle Girl is saying that Trump is going to take over America. This is going to be the last election for all of us if we put him in power. Maddow is just melting down about fascism and other things. Goldman says we got to eliminate Trump. Of course, he later apologized for that, using the word eliminate. And this former senator, McCaskill, is saying that Trump is even worse than Adolf. And you go, my gosh, these people are totally nuts. So the motion to strike the inflammatory language is denied as it pertains to Trump. But this was Trump's original motion. And I wanted to share this with you. You see here, we've covered this one in full on a prior segment, but Trump is saying specifically here that the prosecution is seeking to try President Trump for crimes that the grand jury never charged, based on actions Trump did not take in a place he never was on January 6th, by people he never directed, and opposite to actions he actually did take in statements he made. All of that was language included in the indictment that doesn't relate to the charges, okay? So they keep calling him an insurrectionist who's undermining democracy, but they didn't charge him with any crimes that say you committed an insurrection or you did something to undermine democracy, right? As an example. That is his motion. And now this is Chutkan's response. She says, all right, sorry, Trump, you are denied. Writing in a short 3 pages, not paying much attention to it, she says, you know, Donald Trump filed a motion to strike the inflammatory language from the indictment. They want to strike these paragraphs. They say that in those paragraphs, here's the language. Defendant, meaning Trump, and co-conspirators repeated knowingly false claims of election fraud to gathered supporters, falsely told them that Pence had the authority to and might alter the election results, and directed them to the Capitol to obstruct the certification proceeding and exert pressure on the vice president to take fraudulent actions he had previously refused. Okay, that's in Jack Smith's indictment. Trump says, gotta go, sorry. And that after that, supporters broke through the barriers, cordoning off the Capitol grounds, and then violently attacked law enforcement officers, and then breached the building. And that Trump, quote, refused to issue a calming message aimed at the rioters, which is what Liz Cheney wanted. She wanted to show up there and read all the FBI agents' bedtime stories. Hey, FBI, can you please stop attacking our Capitol? You're supposed to be protecting it. Instead, issued a tweet intended to further delay and to obstruct the certification, attacking Mike Pence for failing to halt the certification proceedings. But the court, through Judge Chutkan, will deny Donald Trump's motion. Big surprise, Judge. She says the federal rules of criminal procedure, they say that a court may strike surplusage language from the indictment or the information upon the defendant's motion. Trump has done that. That rule has been strictly construed against striking surplusage. So motions like the defendant's are highly disfavored in this circuit. That's weird, right? Federal rule says this. This is how the law works. It's the weirdest thing. The federal rules of criminal procedure says literally, this is the quote, a court may strike surplusage from the indictment, but that rule has been interpreted as being highly disfavored. Don't do it. Okay, so why is it a rule then? I mean, if you don't like it, just get it out of the rules. So they should be granted only if it is clear that the allegations are not relevant to the charge and are inflammatory and prejudicial. Well, they seem to be pretty inflammatory to us. Okay. Now, if an allegation is relevant or is not inflammatory, the motion should be denied. Okay, so we got some pretty strict rules. Like you can strike it, but it's a super high standard. It actually has to be inflammatory. Jack Smith's, of course, are not, as we'll find out. She writes, regardless of whether the allegations at issue are relevant against Trump, Trump has not satisfied his burden to clearly show that they are prejudicial. Okay, so everything in the indictment and all of the language that we're about to hear, this is bigger than just the indictment, by the way. It's the indictment, but it's everything. Okay, Trump gets gagged. Trump can't talk about this case. He can't call Jack Smith and the deranged thugs over there deranged thugs. But Jack Smith can put garbage in his indictment. Rachel Maddow can say whatever she wants. Clavicle Clavicle girl, a witness in the J6 cases, can get on TV and say whatever she wants, essentially, and Trump can't respond to it because she's a reasonably foreseeable witness in the insurrection case? All right. Same with Dan Goldman and all these other people. They can hit the media as hard as they want, but the inflammatory language that is in the indictment has to stay, and even though the rules say it can be stricken, she says it doesn't meet the standard. Trump argues that sharing the allegations with the jury may result in prejudice at this trial, because members of the jury may wrongfully impute fault to him for the actions of the Capitol on J6. They argue in their motion that the jury might decline to give Trump the benefit of reasonable doubt due to these extraneous allegations. It's statements that don't match the code. It'd be like if you got charged with a DUI and they made up a bunch of other stuff. They're like, by the way, and you didn't even commit a DUI. You're like, right, you're just driving your car. And there's this guy who got a DUI. They tell the jury, you know, he also ran over a little old lady on the way to the grocery store where he was buying some more booze. And you're like, what are you talking about? I didn't hit a lady. And I was going to visit my grandma, not to go run her over. What are you talking about? They just kind of make it all up. And then they charge you with one crime that's not even true. And you go, what? All of that is not even related to the original charge. It's like if you ran over a little old lady, you'd charge that person with murder, but they didn't charge him with murder, just like they didn't charge Trump with insurrection. But consistent with its past practice, this court will not provide a copy of the indictment to its jurors, and so we're not going to prejudice them. And since we don't even give them a copy of the indictment, there's not going to be prejudice there. So it's like another technical thing. Saying here, referencing some case law, they tell us that Trump's 16-page reply, despite making numerous, oh my gosh. So Chutkan says, oh yeah, Trump, you are saying Jack Smith's indictment is inflammatory? Well, how about this, punk? You, in your reply motion, you make numerous inflammatory and unsupported accusations of your own, saying that President Biden directed the DOJ to prosecute his leading opponent for the presidency through a calculated leak to the New York Times. She says there's no truth to that and devotes only a single paragraph to the prejudice requirement, so doesn't show how Trump is actually prejudiced. Instead, his sole argument, Trump's, is that even if the jury does not receive a copy of the indictment, voluminous evidence exists here that the jury pool in this country, in DC, has been and continues to be exposed to the indictment and its inflammatory and prejudicial allegations through the media coverage, which we're about to listen to, related to the case. And the indictment gives the media cover, right? They say Jack Smith is indicting him for insurrection, but he's not charged with insurrection, but it's in the indictment, right? It's fake, but the defendant fails to cite even one example of that evidence. In any event, they say the voir dire jury selection process will allow the court to examine and address the effects of this pretrial publicity, including anything generated by Trump that it's had on the impartiality of the jurors. And when trial begins, the court will also take steps to screen the jury from any irrelevant and other prejudicial material that either party seeks to introduce. So the judge is saying, I'm going to protect all of this. When trial begins, we're going to protect the jury, which is so weird because if the judge can screen the jury about irrelevant and prejudicial material, can't they also do that for Trump's gag? Like, why does Trump need to be gagged and undermine the legitimacy of the Justice Department, which is part of their argument? They're not just saying Trump can't speak because it might lead to harm, because there really has been no harm for evidence that they've been able to show, but that Trump is undermining the legitimacy of the DOJ. Well, can't they just voir dire that out then? Can't the judge just deal with that in jury selection? Why does she have to gag him? She's just going to screen the jury. Well, just ask the jurors. Did you hear Donald Trump say anything bad about these deranged thugs here? Oh, you didn't? Oh, great. So she gags him because it's about the political battle, right? She wants him to not be able to speak. It is straight out of a totalitarian psychoville. Now, moreover, before the jurors deliberate, the court will instruct them on the actual charges and the evidence that they may consider. But apparently that's too much to ask for Trump's free speech. Now, this too will prevent potential prejudice from the alleged surplusage. And so therefore, for the reasons as the judge stated, the motion to strike the inflammatory allegations from the indictment is hereby denied. Thanks, Judge. Real great legal analysis there. And we all expected that to happen. And we're going to see a lot more of this stuff. All the other motions are going to be denied. But they're making a record, and we'll see what they decide to do from here. But Chutkan is, as we saw, gagging Trump. She's going to correct the problems from their side. Like if Jack Smith talks a bunch of garbage, she'll fix that in voir dire. He's allowed to do that. People like Clavicle girl, who's a J6 witness, is allowed to talk about all this stuff. But Trump can't, because we're living in a double standard world now. Now, I'm going to go through a couple clips here today. We've got Rachel Maddow, who is basically having a meltdown, and she'll start us off here to get things warmed up.
So the American fight against fascism, juxtapose that against what Trump is doing. You have studied this topic extensively weekly and you cover the current news. Are you scared, Rachel?
I sort of feel like we don't have time to be scared, Steph. I feel like there's a lot to do. I mean, it's hard to be a 250-year-old democracy. It's hard to be a democracy. I mean,
yeah, what happened? What did we not do in the previous 250 years? Oh yeah, prosecute our political opponents in this country. Now we're doing it.
Always people who are pushing against it. And right now, the most powerful force in conservative politics is pushing really, really hard against it. And part of the way they want us to get there is some variant of a civil war. We don't have time to worry about it if that's going to preclude us from working against it. And time is short and the river rises. Now's the time, if you're worried about it, to get involved.
Yeah, get involved, everybody. All right. So I am so glad that clip was only 50 seconds. I am so glad. I don't think I could have gone a full minute. I really don't. I don't know what I've done if that lasted even 10 seconds longer. So we made it. That's the hard part. All right. Let's see. This is just as hard, actually. Brace yourselves. So this is Clavicle Girl. Now, Clavicle Girl would presumably be covered by Judge Chutkan's gag order because she's a J6 witness. She was brought in front of Liz Cheney to talk about Trump theoretically reaching over the Secret Service vehicle in the aftermath of January 6th, reached over the Secret Service, grabbed a Secret Service agent driving the vehicle by the clavicle, her testimony, and tried to get the vehicle to go back into the Capitol. Trump's like, "Rah!" And Melania was on a helicopter hanging from the ladder, the rope ladder, like Ethan Hunt from Mission Impossible. And I don't know what the Trump kids were doing, but I know that there was a lot of activity that day. So she was called in front of Liz and Kinzinger, and now she gets to show up on Inside Jen Psaki, MSNBC's hit show, and rant about Trump, and Trump is gagged against responding in America.
What would you tell those of your former colleagues who are concerned but haven't come out publicly about the importance of doing that at this point in time?
I think about the Washington Post put out a good story today about that, Jen, and there are a few particular quotes that stuck out to me, but towards the last half of the article, there were former Trump aides, anonymous former Trump aides, but I will point out that they were given masculine pronouns. So, namely, primarily men who were speaking with the Washington Post anonymously about how they might want to speak out if he is the nominee, or they don't think it's worth speaking out because they'll lose clients. And what I'll say to them, I do understand a fear of retribution. I do fear backlash. I do understand their fear of backlash. But when we think about this next election in 2024, I don't like to play a doomsday hypothesis, but it does look like he is going to be the Republican nominee as of right now.
You better believe it, baby.
If Donald Trump is elected president again in 2024, I do fear that it will be the last election where we're voting for democracy, because if he is elected again, I don't think that we'll be voting under the same constitution that we would be if Joe Biden is elected in 2024.
Yeah, so she's on Team Joe now, which is very curious because she's hanging out with Inside Jen Psaki. Now, this is a curious exchange because she is a witness, right? She's actually talking badly about Trump. So what if Trump were to hop on Truth and say Cassidy Hutchinson is a demented weirdo, right? Or something like that. What a demented weirdo. I would never do anything to the Constitution. I love the Constitution. In fact, I'm the one who adhered to the Constitution. My side, people on the right, were asking Trump to prosecute Hillary, and I didn't do that. I didn't shatter the norms of prosecuting my political opponents, but their side has done that. And so if Trump were to say something like that, that would be in violation of the gag order. She's a reasonably foreseeable witness. She was there as an aide at the White House in some, minor capacity, and now she's hanging out with Psaki and kind of, sounds like sounding the alarm. And so Trump can't talk about this. He's gagged. And this type of inflammation out of MSNBC is allowed to permeate the airwaves? Well, apparently. Dan Goldman can also use worse language than anything Trump ever said. Trump said things like fight like heck. And Dan Goldman shows up also on Psaki's show, who's hysterical about all this insurrection stuff. And he says this, and Jen Psaki let it slide.
I want to also turn to Trump, of course, and just some of what the reporting has been around some of his conversations also as we anticipate a year full of trials next year. I want to take a listen to part of a conversation that he had with ABC's Jonathan Karl about January 6th and get your thoughts on the other end.
You told them you were going to go up to the Capitol. Were you just...
I was going to, and the Secret Service said you can't. And then by the time I would have, and then when I got back, I wanted to go back. I was thinking about going back during the problem to stop the problem, doing it myself. Secret Service didn't like that idea too much.
So what?
And I could have done that, and you know what? I would have been very well received.
So there's been so much speculation, contemplation, discussion of what Trump wanted to do, what he knew or didn't know. I mean, do you think, as a former prosecutor, this is something that could be useful in the case against Trump? How will it be used?
Former prosecutor?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, he says I would be well received because he knows that the people who were there are his supporters who he riled up and incited to invade and riot at the Capitol. Capitol and try to disrupt the proper counting of the Electoral College votes. So every time he talks, he's putting himself into a bigger criminal hole. But that's not his objective. His objective is purely political at this point.
Because that is the only mechanism that exists in a democracy. These people are so dumb, they don't even understand why we have the First Amendment. The First Amendment is to be able to speak openly, rally support to your cause, to challenge what your argument is, a corrupted government. When the government has become corrupted, or when the people in power in current control of the government are corrupted, they have the power. They have the DOJ. They have the FBI. They have all the jurisdictions that they're bringing these charges in, like Washington, D.C., for example. They have it all. So you have to talk out politically about this. This is natural. This is a healthy thing, right? If Trump were prosecuting people, you better expect that people would be saying, wait a minute, what? This is shattering 234 years of precedent. But he never did that. They did.
Politics don't work in a courtroom, as I think he's finding out in the New York Attorney General's case in New York, a civil case, and that's going to continue in his criminal trials. But his rhetoric is really getting dangerous, more and more dangerous. And we saw what happened on January 6th when he uses inflammatory rhetoric now. 2.0. And his recent Truth Social post is incredibly scary for anyone that might be trying to work in government. And it is just unquestionable at this point that that man cannot see public office again. He is not only unfit, he is destructive to our democracy, and he has to be eliminated.
What? Eliminated? That sounds pretty bad, Dan. Sounds like you might be arguing for a crime. Maybe stochastic terrorism. What if somebody does something against Trump? What if Trump gets a bad email? What if there's a bad phone call? What if somebody listening to Inside Jen Psaki's show sends a mean tweet and Trump gets harassed? This is a congressperson calling for the elimination of a former president and a presidential candidate nominee, the leading contender, calling for him to be eliminated. And look at his little smirk there. He knows what he did. You could say defeated, beaten at the ballot box, but he chose eliminated. Now, of course, he did apologize for that. He's like, oh man, this is pretty bad. I just committed an insurrection in America. He's like, I've been screaming for Trump to be prosecuted over this thing, and I just did it on Psaki's show. He says, yesterday on TV, I mistakenly used the wrong word to express the importance for America that Donald Trump doesn't become president again. Well, he must be defeated. There you go. Got it, Dan. I certainly wish no harm to him and do not condone political violence. I apologize for the poor choice of words. Well, we still don't like it, Dan, so thanks for the apology, but no thanks. So this is former Senator Claire McCaskill also doing the same thing, right? These are like former government officials and other government officials like Dan Goldman, other Congress people, other actual witnesses. Everybody's allowed to talk inflammatory language about Trump, but Trump is gagged, and Trump can't even respond to court documents, even though the rules say he can. But this is Claire McCaskill, who is now arguing, and pay close attention to the language she uses, but she says, these people are bad, like Adolf is a pretty bad dude, but Trump is worse, okay? What's even more concerning about Trump? So, like Adolf and these people are like over here, but then there's Trump, man, and it's bad.
A lot of people have tried to draw similarities between Mussolini and Hitler and the use of the terminology bad like dudes. Vermin and the drive that those men had towards autocracy and dictatorship. But the difference, though, I think makes Donald Trump even more dangerous, and that is he has no philosophy he believes in. He is not trying to expand the boundaries of the United States of America. He's not trying to overcome a neighboring country like Putin is in Ukraine.
Or like Adolf
he is not going for some grandiose scheme of international dominance. All he wants is to look in the mirror and see a guy who's president. All he cares about is selfish self-promotion.
That's worse than Holocaust? What?
That's the only philosophy he has, which makes him even more dangerous because he has actually said out loud that it would be okay to terminate the Constitution to keep him in power. He said this. He actually said those words. And the irony is all of these supposed conservative folks that have populated the Republican Party all stood around and with their thumb in their mouth going, well, yeah, okay, I guess so. It's bizarre.
Oh, man, it's going to be a weird Thanksgiving dinner with her at the table, isn't it? Look at her, man, the head bob and everything. She's just going, he's so the Constitution. It's like, lady, do you realize what your party is doing? What Constitution? You've wrecked free speech. You're trying to undermine the Justice Department, the justice system in this country at every turn. And you have this claim now that Donald Trump, hey, by the way, can I just, self-interested people oftentimes do a good job at certain roles. Because if you're a good president, then that that is good for your legacy, right? It is good for the Trump brand. It is good for the Trump reputation. If Trump gets in and he does a good job for America, yes, it's good for America. It's also good for Trump. We're in alignment. The interests are aligned. The problem is when you've got somebody like a Biden, for example, where what's good for the Bidens is not necessarily good for America, because you've got the Chinese pumping money into Hunter and James and Sarah and Hallie and the rest of them, right? So it's when those interests are disaligned, when they're self-interested rather, a little broadly, like when the self-interest misaligns with the American interests, that's when you have a problem. But if they're in alignment, that's a great thing. But apparently that's worse than World War II and like 60 million dead. So, all right, well, we'll figure that out. Hopefully her family brings some extra wine this Thanksgiving for them. And so it's a strange situation where inflammatory language can be thrown in indictments, where even witnesses can hop on mainstream media, badmouth and belittle and slam the opposition. But Trump is gagged. Trump is limited by the judge from even removing some of the surplus language that is not even relevant to the charges from the document. And they sit around pretending like this is actual justice in America. And anybody else who challenges them is undermining the legitimacy of the institution. Nope, they're doing it themselves. We're just here observing and defending against what they're trying to do, which is wrecking once sacred principles of due process, presumption of innocence, free speech, and so on. But we'll be here continuing to cover, my friends. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for going over to robertgovea.com to sign up for our daily newsletter. That way you get these show reports all delivered to your inbox, and you can share those with friends and family, and we'll be looking forward to seeing you and them on the next one.